Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining this webinar from the Information Records Management Society. My name's Emma, I'm the chair of the London group, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on this very special webinar. What I'm just going to do is give people a few seconds to come in and then we'll make a start. So the chat bar is live, so please type in hello and where are you joining from today. Also be interested to know what organisation, what sector you're in as well. So if you wouldn't mind popping that in, please do. We've got lots of people joining. I will be putting a few polls in the event chat as well, so please do have a look at those. But yes, I think without any further ado, I will hand over to our great speakers today, Richard, Jordan, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will hand over to you for this talk about incorporating email into information management strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard Jeffrey Cook. I'm Head of Information and Records Management at Inform Consult. Very pleased you came along to join us for this webinar. And I'm even more pleased to say I'm joined by Tim Brady and Sjoerd Alkema of Colligo and Celio, respectively. So Tim, if you'd like to say hello.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for coming out. Thanks for the intro there, Richard. So I'm Tim Brady, CEO at Colligo. I'm also on the board of another information management association in the industry, and happy to be here today.
And Sjoerd?
Yes, thank you, Richard. My name is Sjoerd Alkema. I'm the head of sales and marketing at Celio. I have a background in information management, enterprise content management, around 15 years, and happy to see so many people already in, and excited about this webinar.
Thank you. So without further ado, what we're planning to do is essentially give you an introduction on challenges and some suggested solutions on addressing your records management strategy. Now, the quiz is, can you answer the questions on the polls? So I don't know, Emma, if they're up. I'm not seeing them, which makes me wonder.
Yes, sorry, just one sec. I'm just getting them on. So it's a little bit of a delay my side.
So the purpose of the polls is just so that we can tweak our presentation to fit any particular needs. While Emma's doing that, I'll mention you can also add questions into the webinar, and I can see many of you are already actually using the chat feature to introduce yourselves and your roles, which is very much appreciated. So you should see the polls coming up on your screens right now, and you will be able to submit your responses. So while that's going on, I think I'll move on and start introducing why we think email is a challenge. So how do we incorporate email into our records management strategy? Email is a challenge basically for a number of different reasons, but probably the first one, which I'll cover, is the fact that email goes to an individual. And in the way it's presented, because we have our own inboxes, then it's often seen as sort of personal information rather than the information which is belonging to the organization. And so that leads to a whole series of use issues of, well, this is my email, I want to manage it my way, rather than managing it according to the requirements of the organization. Now why is that not? Oh, there you go. Sorry, just having a slight technical hiccup there. So second big challenge with email is actually all around just the sheer volume of messages that we tend to deal with these days. I mean, I'm sure many of, or all of us, have had the situation where we've gone on leave for a week and come back to that inbox with the dreaded hundreds of messages waiting to be read. Many of which, by the time you read them, may actually be sort of out of date. So that again leads to problems with how do you filter out the crucial and the important from the trivial or even obsolete messages that you've got to deal with. Another big challenge with email has been really the way it's been stored. Most of our information, sort of non-structured information, tends to be either in what was shared file servers, or in these days could be in Microsoft 365. But email itself has traditionally been sort of stuck to one side rather than being part of the standard filing system. And combined with this whole notion of the individuality of email has led to this very situation where email seems to have its own rules, and there's a perception that it's somehow different from the bulk of other information that we're actually storing. So all of these challenges have been around for a long time. I mean, I've realized, sadly, I've now been focusing on records management in my career for over 20 years. And the challenges that we faced back in 2003 really weren't too dissimilar. Back then, we wanted to incorporate our email into our main records management system. Fortunately, we were using Trim from Tower Software at the time, and we were able to set up inboxes that were organized by project. They had a project email address, and anything going to that project email address would then be sent on to that particular folder for storage. And that worked really well because we copied in the project email address on any emails we sent out, and we encouraged our clients to send any responses back to the project email address, basically claiming that we would ensure, even if somebody was away, that the email would still be addressed. That wasn't, we could have done that other ways. That wasn't really the reason. The main reason, we were actually getting our clients to file our emails for us, which always struck me as a particularly good idea. So there were solutions even then, but often the solutions have sort of not been filtered through into modern day applications. And yes, you can do similar sorts of things these days with email rules, but it's not always the way that these things get to happen. Why do we need to manage our email? Well, primarily there are three main reasons, and they fall down to legislation, governance, and then efficiency. So legislation, we've got things like Freedom of Information Act, Data Protection Act. If you're in Scotland, you've got the Public Records Scotland Act, and we need to ensure that we can keep the information for as long as the business requires. But if it's personal data, we've then got to make sure we can also get rid of it. And one of the challenges with email is that there's also a lot of personal data involved here. But it's not only purely legislation, it's also good governance to manage our email, and from a pure efficiency point of view, the risks that are being run with uncontrolled email and indefinite retention of email, and just the efficiency of being able to find the information when we need it, and ensure that we're not recreating the wheel every time we look for information that in fact the organization already has. So we can do it by, essentially it's coming down to storing it, being able to find it when we need it, and finding an email I created yesterday, no problem at all. Finding an email that was stored by a colleague 12 months ago, that's when you know you're managing emails efficiently, is when you're able to do that without having to do massive searches and hunting for the information. And then finally, actually disposing of it when we need to, and that should be in line with corporate information records management policies. So all challenges that we need to address. So how do we go about that? Well, fundamentally, our challenge is actually categorizing, or as we know, business classifying our emails. And although there are alternative ways, the main way records managers do this is through a sort of function and activity basis. And we prefer to do that because, unlike organization structures, the functions and activities of the organization tend to be stable. And there are primarily 5 reasons that we classify information. The first is so that we can actually, if we need to, organize our storage. Now, with electronic record management systems, that isn't always necessary. So we don't have to organize our storage purely on a function activity basis, but it can still be incredibly useful. The second is to provide us with context. So an individual piece of information or email on its own is of limited value. But when we get a set of related records, then we have the advantage of getting the much better, bigger picture. The third reason for classifying is so that we can browse for information rather than relying on searching. And the two are quite distinct. Searching, you've got to know some information about what you're looking for before you can find it. With browsing, it's like going into the library and then deciding, well, what type of book might I want to read, fiction or non-fiction? And then you home in. If it's fiction, it might be a romance, might be crime or whatever. And you don't actually need to know anything about the information when you start looking for it. In the same way as if you search for a book, you've got to know something about the book before you can find it. With browsing, you don't actually need to do that. A fourth reason is so that we can apply our security policies. And then the fifth reason is so that we can apply our retention and disposal policies. And fundamentally, without categorizing, it's a real challenge to actually manage our information and our emails in particular. So from that, how do we actually go about it? Well, what we have here is Napoleon, who is the master of strategy, and the Duke of Wellington, who's the master tactician. And I would argue, basically, to address email, you need a combination of both. So the strategy, any good informational records management strategy needs to figure out the place for email, and it has to be part of the overall approach. But then if we're going to manage that email effectively, we've also got to make sure that it fits into the user's needs and we're applying the right tactics. And this is where Tim at Colligo will be happy to show you some of the approaches that can be used to take that. But we also have to consider the whole volume of information we're dealing with. The challenge, as ever with records management, is that we also have to deal with all that legacy information as well. And this is where Sjoerd will come in, explaining the advantages of how they can help to deal with that legacy as well. So I've noticed in the polls, we asked actually about, do you have an email governance policy in place? I have to say, I find, I don't know whether it's sad or scary. It's probably a combination of both, that 41% have no policy in place. And it just shows the challenge that we still got to deal with. I notice only 2% use a Capstone approach. Just briefly, Capstone is an approach sort of implemented over in the United States. I would argue it's a challenge to, it's not impossible, but it's a challenge to implement Capstone approaches in Europe and the UK, primarily because of the issues of data protection. But it is an approach I've actually implemented with one organization where 6 particular email accounts, all emails from those accounts are actually automatically moved into a records management system for permanent preservation. Within the email accounts themselves, there is a signature which actually says that this is going to happen if you reply to this email address, and if you've got any concerns, to contact the records officer. Interestingly, in the first 2 years of operation, not one person actually contacted the records officer on this point. Now, that either proves that nobody reads signatures, which is my own suspicion, or it means that nobody actually cared that these emails were being permanently preserved. Maybe it was a combination of the both. Anyway, I've probably talked for long enough at this stage. So what I'll do now is hand over to Tim, who will introduce us to the Colligo email solutions. Tim.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And this up here. Awesome. So hopefully you can see my screen here. So as the webinar is titled today, incorporating email into an information management strategy. Great overview by Richard, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of a tactical how to do this and why it's important and whatnot as we go through here. So just a quick high-level view on Colligo here. So we've actually been around for 20 years. We've always been focused on delivering of the promise of Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, right? When you buy it, you expect it to do all these things. And especially if you're in a compliant or more regulated industry, we want to take you that last mile and make sure it does what you need it to have proper governance and compliance in your organization. Solely focused on helping organizations better manage their emails and documents in a compliant way. And importantly, we do this in the cloud. So we're really focused on helping you do this in Microsoft 365 and really helping you do more with less, right? You already pay for Microsoft 365. Well, let's take the benefits of that and augment that and really build off that and help you do more with the software you already own. And so we really have a suite of products at Colligo, suite of solutions that really help you capture, tag, access, and manage your documents and emails. But we're really going to focus on one aspect today, which is the email and really how you get emails from Outlook into SharePoint and why you would want to do that. So there's really 3 principal reasons why you'd want to file emails into SharePoint. First being the records management and information governance side of it. As Richard pointed to, the legislative angle plays in here. So this is really the regulatory compliance, record keeping. The second would be the knowledge management purposes, right? Collaboration, maybe you want to move a project or something tied to a certain project manager into SharePoint for future access. This is really protecting your organizational info or tribal knowledge, if you will. And the third, it can be part of a business process, right? Move this invoice to here, and that kicks off some other business process or automation. But really, again, what we're going to focus on today is the first one here, which is the records management and information governance angle, which is still the predominant reason why you'd want to put emails into SharePoint. And so the analogy I like to use is, maybe your house was a bit, cluttered. Your old house was a bit cluttered. You had things everywhere. It just built up over time. And then you used one of our good migration partners like Celio and IFC to really, as you move to your new house, right? And they help you organize your new enterprise content management system. And, it's nice and organized. You have things in proper buckets and labeled well, and you really like your new house. It's nice and compliant and well organized, right? And how do you preserve this going forward, right? More information's coming into your organization every day. It probably looks something like this, and you really want to help keep it organized, right? Keep things stored well and put in the right place and properly tagged. And that's really where Colligo can come in, right? So once you've used Celio and you've gotten everything nice and organized and well structured, how do you keep that with the ongoing day-to-day volume of email and records coming into your organization? That's where we can step in. As I quickly flash this, as I was explaining the cluttered house here, this is probably representative of what your organization looks like, right? 80% of unstructured data, or 80% of your data is unstructured. It's documents, it's emails, it's media files, it's everywhere, right? And when we look at the other systems, the other parts of the world, it's the ERP, CRM, finance system, data warehouse, they're all structured, right? So how do you structure documents and make them a lot more organized? And that's, ultimately what we're focused on with classification and leveraging things like metadata, and really preserving that structure over time so you can get more value out of your information and you can actually find what you're looking for, as well as be on side with any legislative or regulatory audits around your documents and information. And so Colligo does this in a way that helps you bring your emails and content right from Outlook through the Colligo application, where we layer in some automation and we pull out some metadata tags or retention tags, retention labels, and help you store that email or that file in either SharePoint predominantly or also in Teams, if that's something your organization's interested in, right? We commonly say Outlook is not a repository. I don't know how many organizations we speak to where they're still using Outlook to store all their files, and maybe they have some nice folders set up, and that's great, but that eventually breaks, right? For multiple reasons, either hitting storage reasons or just, you can't, it's nice and email's siloed and it's off on its own, as Richard pointed to, and you can't access your colleagues' information, and someone leaves an organization and all that information's gone or buried, and so that eventually breaks, right? And so Outlook should not be used as that repository for the organization. We were down at a conference a couple weeks ago, and the number one problem organizations are struggling with from our view of the conference is email retention and classification in Exchange and SharePoint. And so this is a hot button issue right now. A lot of organizations looking how to better organize, retain their emails in Microsoft 365. And ultimately why the automation and tagging component is important here is you need to make it easy, right? Or else we all have experience with metadata and users not necessarily following along. So you got to automate a lot of that and limit the amount of metadata tags that the actual end user needs to use to really the most critical and the most important. And then also we do believe that things at the end of the day do need tags, right? And so whether it's a retention label being applied at the user level or at the container level as you save that into SharePoint, we believe that's a critical part of actually deeming something a record and moving or copying it to SharePoint. And so why are these labels important, right? There's the governance angle, so you can auto-apply policies configured in Microsoft Records Management or Microsoft Purview. you can use for retention purposes, as I kind of just covered. You can also drastically improve your search, discoverability, and retrievability. So much easier to find something when you go to SharePoint to find it, or find it in another way like Colligo's Content Manager, if you've actually used and attached those labels to the document or the email, right? Much easier to search, filter, and ultimately surface what you're looking for, and that can save you, each of your users, and your organization tons of time every day, week, year. The numbers are quite staggering on what metadata can do for the search process. And then again, as I pointed to earlier, downstream business process, right? A certain metadata field or tag can trigger a workflow, maybe a follow-up action, and that's another reason we see a lot of organizations using metadata labels. And so where does Colligo come in, right? We talked about how Colligo helps you get your document email into SharePoint and apply labels to it and deem it a record. We really see it along these two vectors here in this 2x2. So collaboration, complexity, anytime there's advanced collaboration needs, or there's increased complexity is where Colligo, governance complexity is where Colligo really comes in, right? So again, any regulated industry, or anytime you're dealing with records or documents that are important to the organization, there's any complexity around that, that's where Colligo can really come in, augment SharePoint, and help you with your email archiving and email filing. And so we talk a lot about Microsoft Purview lately, which is Microsoft's modern version of the records management capabilities, right? And really, Colligo adds critical value here, kind of in the center. It's within Microsoft's purview, set up all these great policies and make Microsoft 365 a lot more compliant and better governance for you. But how do you actually deem an email as a record? And Colligo's that vehicle, or that tool you can use to actually make that email into a record, move it to SharePoint to adhere to those policies you've set up and spent time to set up there, and really brings the full picture together. Okay. And with that, I will quickly provide a demo. Okay, so what you're seeing here, hopefully you're seeing my screen, is I'm in Outlook, the web version of Outlook. It's the exact same if you're on the desktop version, but for the purposes here, I'll show it in the browser version of Outlook, or OWA. And so I have an email that just came in, right? This MSAA, and I'm going to find the Colligo button here. And I need to file this email to SharePoint, right? Maybe it's part of a project, maybe it's a legal document, maybe it's an invoice. In this case, it's an engineering type document, right? And so I can go and find all my locations in SharePoint that I have access to. We work with the permissioning of SharePoint and Microsoft 365. And I can also find locations in Teams, OneDrive, hub sites. But what makes my life a lot quicker is I actually can save and pin these certain locations that I'm using every day. And so I am going to click this Dempsey Brothers location, and I'm going to hit the cloud upload. Before I do, I'll just show that there is an option to separate out the attachment here, which is important because we see organizations do it in all different ways. Some only want the attachment, some want the email as the record plus the attachment, and some only want the email. But so I will hit the Colligo upload button here. It's checking for conflict, loading the properties of the destination you're saving to. And as you can see, there's a bunch of metadata fields already plugged in here. So we're pulling out 23 different metadata tags out of that email just to make the user's life a lot more easier. And you can add in, as these are all admin settings of and how you configure your SharePoint for additional tags you can add to that email. As you can see here, you could limit it to just the required fields to make this super easy, which would be the content type. And then there's also an option, should you choose and should your organization believe in this, to add different retention labels as well. For completeness, I'll just add the contracts label here. I'll hit continue, and that email is now gone. That's in SharePoint. It's off in the cloud, running in Azure, and it's that simple to file an email. And as you saw, we worked with the retention labels there. We added some metadata in case we face any legal hold or discovery type purposes or processes, and that's the quick high level of how you can save to SharePoint. One other thing I will mention is we do have a capability to move a whole folder as well. So say you had a project you've been working on for a couple weeks and you missed a few emails, it's just easier to move the whole folder. That's also a capability to move or copy that folder over, and we call that the Colligo bulk mover copy functionality as well. And we've seen quite a bit of traction around that lately as well. So, and with that, I will stop sharing that screen. Perfect. And so just to finish up, we really think of it as a win-win, right? Records managers, compliance managers, they're happy because these processes are being in place. Governance of the organization is better. Legal's happy. C-suite's happy. But at the end user level, it's really okay. I'm filing these emails. It's easier. It's made my life a bit quicker on this process I have to follow. But it's also much easier to surface the content I'm looking for, right? And that eliminates quite a bit of frustration and really saves end users a lot of time. And so we see it truly as a win-win at different levels of the organization. And we really see this end-to-end flow, right? Of from wherever you start, it's this on this journey towards information governance. You can be in the process of being on, so many were from the poll I saw earlier on Exchange on Prem and SharePoint server. Maybe you're considering the migration to SharePoint Online and Microsoft 365, right? And work with our good partners here at Celio and IFC, and you go through that migration, you set up this beautiful information architecture, and then how do you preserve that on the go forward basis and continue to work with that, be compliant and more effective with your email and document management. And that's where Colligo kicks in. And it's really just a kind of an end-to-end journey here. And you can kind of start at any point is the way we like to phrase it. And with that, I will pass it over to Sjoerd.
Yes, thank you, Tim. Let me share my screen. All right, so hope my screen is showing. From Celio, as a migration company, so a little bit of an introduction. That's what we've been doing for 20 years. We see actually that emails are becoming more and more part of the challenges that our customers have. Maybe that has to do with the move we also see, or what we see is happening within the world of content services. So I'm an enterprise content management consultant already for 15 years, and and we see that our world is changing. And what's happening, of course, is that there's this move to the cloud that's been fully adopted. And what we see from a migration company perspective is that is also it has also been really adopted within the more regulatory environments, within government, within financial organizations, where records management and email records management has a big role, of course. So we see that that's happening, and we see there has been a accelerator, which is the COVID pandemic, where everyone started to work online within teams, also managing their content there. So we see there's this large move into Microsoft 365 from legacy platforms, because they're already working with teams, already doing a lot of things within SharePoint. It's easy to access. So why are we now still doing our other stuff in our old legacy platform? But that's not all, because also on the Microsoft side already there had to be some change, because as I said, I'm an enterprise content management consultant. If you asked me 10 years ago, hey, we're going to do our primary content processes and our records management, we're going to do that in Microsoft, then probably I started laughing, or at least a lot of the people wouldn't really take that seriously. But they have done heavy investment, a lot of development within functionality, and Tim mentioned Purview. It's really capable of doing everything that the old legacy platforms could only do 10 years ago. So there's definitely a shift there. So that's also playing a huge part of why there's this change happening. And I think also why email is a bigger ask from our customers when it comes to migration. Because these legacy platforms typically had a heavy email integration. They were heavily used within primary processes that were totally focused on email. Hence, there's a lot of emails in those platforms. So what are you going to do with that? And then if we're going to migrate it, how's then our process going to be moving forward? So that's also why we work together happily with our value partners Colligo on the email integration side, but also with IFC to set up the governance around that email email management. Because we see from a migration company that it's bigger than just a migration, or at least that's also what's happening. That's maybe also a development in the market. So what we offer is a smart and compliant way to migrate. That's what we've been doing for as long as we exist. We migrate from legacy to modern, and we've specialized actually in a very compliant way, and also migrating systems of records, having that knowledge, and having the technology to connect to the various sources. So briefly, how we do that, it always follows this ETL process, right? You need to extract your data, you need to transform it, and you need to load it into your new environment. And before that, once you've extracted, you also want to discover, because you want to understand your data. We've got several tools for that. One is called Insights. It gives you an overview of what you have to make the right decisions. And what we now see, and what's also one of our default reports, is it's important to understand how many emails or MSG or files that you store as a record in your legacy platform are in. And that brings us already some information on how your integration is and how it was used. So that's one of the key things in that insights approach. Then after that, the migration is built within our migration builder. So basically, you take the design, you take all the business logic, you take everything that's needed to transform, and make sure that that's executed, and that's all executed on our unified content repository, and we'll then eventually move it into Microsoft 365. So that's on the migration side. That's the platform we have already for a long time. It's been heavily used by us and our partners, but we see there's more questions around this transformation or migration into Microsoft 365. So what we developed and have our partners for is added value, added solutions and services. For instance, we have developed some archives. Maybe sometimes there's a lot of data that you don't really want to throw away, but also that's it's not really of value anymore. Probably not in the regulatory environments, but we do see the use case quite a lot. We created an archive so you can kind of park it, you can still search for it when you need it, but it's not in your active environment. Another one is link redirection. A lot of these old platforms were used as a central repository with a lot of links pointing into it. Once you move out, links break. So what do? Another one is content health. You wanna keep your content healthy afterwards. So I have some dashboards on that. And a big one where our partner Colligo and we're talking about here is email integration. So a lot of these platforms had it. Then you move to Microsoft 365, and although Outlook is Microsoft and SharePoint is Microsoft, it's not that strong. So many of our customers have a need for something better, like Tim just demoed with the classification and the tagging. Other services that complete the content services functionality are syntax. Viva won't talk too much about that. We can do a whole webinar on that. But it's definitely something that we have now in our capabilities to use to provide that full service on the transformation from your legacy platform into Microsoft 365. Next to that, information governance. IFC has been in that area already for quite some time, so we use them and ask them to join forces when these questions come up with our customers. Then finally, I wanted to quickly share an approach, more from a project approach perspective on an email migration, how we do these. So we always start with the analysis after the whole project is set up and the plan is approved, etc. We want to do a data analysis, and we also want to get the classification gap. Most of the times, the classification is not ideal. It could be better, or mistakes were made, or there's just a different way of doing it for the future. So there's a gap we want to identify. Next step is to actually classify. So we use different tools for that, but it's based on the available data, and we can use, for instance, also Colligo in that process to make sure all the emails are tagged appropriately. What we see many times is that there's also a restructuring involved, and that's more emails that were stored in file plans. There's a new file plan. There's a new way of archiving. So we need to restructure as part of the migration as well. Another important one is cleaning up. It's always good to clean up duplicates, redundant, obsolete, or trivial emails. Take them out before you migrate into your new platform. Then the actual migration, it's done through our connectors that connect to the APIs and move all the emails. So that's on the legacy platform migration. And then if you want to migrate your actual email Outlook, then that's also possible. And then you want to keep that integrated, then you can use Colligo. Setting policies and the right governance labels, it's also not a problem. It's part of the migration capabilities. And of course, reconciliations after you have migrated. Make sure you know exactly where it was, what happened to it, and where it is now, as part of our compliant migration approach. That's done after everything's done. We call it a migration audit trail, so you know exactly what happened. After that, either through Colligo or to dashboards we provide, you want to stay in control of your newly set up, clean, modern environment, and make sure it doesn't turn into more chaos again. So you want to have the tools to keep it clean and keep it organized. And Colligo is one of the tools, but there's also some insights dashboards that you can use to identify how is it going. And that's my part of it. I know we're almost at time. There's maybe a little room for some questions. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you all so much. So I think a few of the questions have already been answered, or we've been discussing them about sharing. We have one.
Yes, there was a question to Tim asking how do clients usually manage their email in Colligo? Tim, I don't know if you've got a view on that.
Yes, so I don't see that one here. But generally, so generally Colligo just works with whatever information architecture or file plan you have in SharePoint. So you push Colligo out through the 365 admin center to the end users, and you'll automatically see whatever locations in SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive that you have access to. So we work with the M365 permissions, SharePoint permissions to show you those locations you have access to. So from the Colligo standpoint, it's really plug and play and works with whatever you have in SharePoint, and we rely on our good partners such as you guys to set up a great file plan and information architecture if there's one that needs to be implemented there. So.
Thank you, Tim. Ruth asked a question on staff struggling to put files into SharePoint, suggesting that that's often because they have to select categories, document types, that sort of thing. Why would they change their habits? Well, I think certainly our experience in Inform Consult is this is very much a change management challenge. And it's all about getting them to see the benefits, to not necessarily to the organization, but the benefits they themselves can get by doing this. The trick is to make sure what they're having to enter is as minimal as possible, that we're not involved in long, lengthy filling out data fields. But in moderation, the benefits can actually outweigh the overheads, and it's getting the staff to see that. I won't pretend it's easy, because it isn't. I wouldn't have had a career for 40 years if it was easy, but it is worth persevering with. I think there was a quick question for Sjoerd on, can Celio handle chat messages or team channel messages?
Yeah, so we can. Probably there can be chat messages in other systems that you migrate then as a history, as a part of a history of into another file. I don't know what's meant with saving the chat messages within the context of Teams, but yeah, we could get them out and store them in. If you want to migrate from Microsoft Teams into another system, then we can get them out, if that's what it's saying.
Great, thank you. Well, I think thank you very much from myself and the rest of us, and I'll hand back to Emma to wrap this session up.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, thank you, Tim and Sjoerd as well. Really, really fascinating. Lots to take away in there. And thank you, everyone. We have run out of time, but do get in touch with me after the webinar if you have any kind of further feedback. And this has been recorded, so it will go up on the IRMS's YouTube channel in the coming few weeks or so after we've finished. So yeah, just leaves me to say thank you again. Thank you to everyone for attending. Thanks to our speakers, and yeah, have a great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you soon at another IRMS event. Thank you.